The story of the French submarine Surcouf begins in the uneasy calm that followed the First World War, a time when nations were rebuilding but also quietly preparing for the next great conflict. The lessons learned from the brutal U-boat campaign still lingered in the minds of naval strategists who recognized that submarines were no longer mere coastal defenders, but potentially decisive tools of global warfare. In 1922, the Washington Naval Treaty attempted to restrain an accelerating naval arms race by limiting the size and firepower of battleships and aircraft carriers. Yet, in a critical oversight, the treaty left submarines virtually unregulated. This loophole allowed nations like France, feeling disadvantaged by the treaty's restrictive tonnage ratios, to explore bold new ideas about what undersea warfare could become. French naval planners, drawing inspiration from German long-range raiders of the previous war, envisioned a hybrid vessel that merged the endurance and stealth of a submarine with the reach and firepower of a cruiser. Their ambition became Project Q, the blueprint for what would become the Surcouf. The vessel was named after Robert Surcouf, the legendary privateer whose daring raids against British shipping during the Napoleonic era had become French naval lore. This new submarine would adopt the privateer's spirit, independent, long-ranged, and designed to wreak havoc on enemy commerce across the globe. It would not rely solely on torpedoes, expensive, limited in number, and often difficult to reload, but instead wield heavy artillery to cripple merchant vessels and save its torpedoes for more valuable targets. France wanted a ship that could operate alone for months, patrol distant colonies, enforce blockades, and serve as a sovereign symbol of national reach at a time when its geopolitical standing was threatened. When the vessel finally emerged from the Cherbourg shipyards in 1929, the Surcouf was unlike anything the world had ever seen. At 110 meters in length and displacing more than 4,300 tons submerged, it was the largest submarine in existence, an underwater titan that would hold that title until Japan launched its War 400 class in 1944. Its massive frame allowed it to carry an unprecedented array of equipment: two 203mm naval guns and a fully rotating watertight turret, the same size mounted on contemporary heavy cruisers, 10 torpedo tubes of both 550mm and 400mm calibers, a floating hangar containing a Besson MB-411 reconnaissance floatplane, a motor launch for boarding operations, and even a brig capable of holding 40 prisoners captured during commerce raiding missions. No other submarine in the world attempted to combine such disparate technologies and roles into a single platform. Surcouf was an experiment born of political necessity and bold imagination, and while it embodied extraordinary engineering ambition, its sprawling complexity would become the root of many of its greatest problems. The submarine's enormous twin 8-inch guns could fire 260-pound shells at targets miles away, guided by a 5-meter optical rangefinder perched atop the conning tower. In theory, the vessel could ambush a merchant ship with gunfire before being detected, or launch a torpedo strike against a warship. Yet the heavy top weight of the turret, rangefinder, and aircraft hangar created dangerous stability issues. In heavy seas, the Surcouf rolled so severely that accurate gunnery became almost impossible. Furthermore, the low height of the rangefinder compared to a surface cruiser severely limited the practical firing range. Though the guns themselves could theoretically hurl shells 20 miles, the crew usually could not spot targets beyond 7 miles due to the low vantage point and curvature of the Earth. What worked on paper often failed on the open ocean. The Besson MB-411 aircraft, intended to provide over-the-horizon reconnaissance and spotting for the guns, represented another compromise. Stored disassembled in a cylindrical hangar, the aircraft required calm seas to launch and recover. Even under ideal conditions, assembly took around half an hour, a luxury rarely available during wartime. Once airborne, the plane could dramatically extend the submarine's visibility, but if rough weather developed while the aircraft was aloft, recovery became impossible. The pilot might be forced to ditch, losing both plane and crew. Despite this, the very presence of an aircraft aboard a submarine captured the world's imagination and contributed to the vessel's formidable reputation. The Surcouf entered active service in 1934, and almost immediately the crew discovered the practical costs of such an ambitious design. The vessel's enormous size created a range of hydrodynamic problems. It took nearly 2 minutes to dive to periscope depth, an eternity in an era when aircraft could spot and attack submarines in less than a minute. Above the waves, its behavior was equally troubling. It rolled heavily, pitched unpredictably, and was a notoriously unstable gun platform. Meanwhile, its propulsion system, driven by massive Sulzer diesels, proved temperamental and prone to failure. Breakdowns were common, making long patrols especially difficult. Still, despite its flaws, the Surcouf became a symbol of French naval power, visiting colonies and participating in fleet maneuvers. It represented France's determination to remain a global maritime power at a time when its position in Europe was steadily declining. When World War II erupted in 1939, the Surcouf was deployed in convoy escort duties. But in June 1940, the German invasion of France swept rapidly toward the Atlantic coast. The submarine was in dry dock at Brest, undergoing major repairs, its engines partly disassembled and its rudder malfunctioning. As German forces closed in, the crew faced a stark choice: destroy the vessel or attempt escape. On June 18, 1940, Captain Paul Martin chose to save the submarine. Operating on jury-rigged systems and using improvised propulsion, the Surcouf struggled toward England at only 4 knots and unable to dive. Any Luftwaffe patrol could have destroyed it with ease, yet under cover of night and amid the chaos of France's collapse, the submarine reached Plymouth on June 20th. It had escaped, but only barely. The crew's relief was short-lived. With France's armistice with Germany, Britain feared that French warships in Allied ports might be seized by the Axis or might defect. Winston Churchill authorized Operation Catapult, ordering the seizure of all French vessels in British harbors. On July 3, 1940, British forces attempted to board the Surcouf. What happened next was tragic and remains one of the most painful incidents in French-British wartime relations. A British boarding party entered the submarine before dawn, hoping to secure it peacefully, but confusion and fear escalated into gunfire inside the narrow passageways. Commander Dennis Sprague and Lieutenant Patrick Griffiths of the Royal Navy were fatally shot, while Warrant Officer Yves Daniel on the French side was also killed. The French doctor on board killed a British sailor who attempted to force entry into the sickbay. It was a dark, bitter encounter, one that shaped the Surcouf's wartime reputation and poisoned relations between its crew and the British authorities. Most of the experienced French crew refused to serve under the Free French forces led by Charles de Gaulle and chose repatriation to occupied France. Only 16 men remained. Reconstituting the crew proved difficult. The Surcouf was extraordinarily complex, and many of its systems required specialized expertise. Naval officers had to recruit among fishermen, merchant sailors, and volunteers, building an entirely new team to operate the world's most complicated submarine with limited training and under the perpetual suspicion of its supposed allies. During its time in American ports in 1941, rumors circulated that the Surcouf was secretly aiding German U-boats or smuggling gold. Though baseless, the rumors reflected how mistrust had come to surround the vessel. Its size, secrecy, and foreign crew made it seem alien to American dock workers and officials already jittery about sabotage and espionage. Despite distrust, the Surcouf was eventually pressed into active service by the Free French naval forces. In December 1941, it participated in the liberation of the islands of Saint Pierre and Miquelon off Newfoundland, which were under Vichy French control. The landing was carried out without violence, and the local population welcomed the change, but the operation angered the United States, which had been attempting to maintain diplomatic relations with Vichy France. Secretary of State Cordell Hull condemned the action, referring dismissively to the so-called Free French ships, a comment that sparked political tensions and further isolated the Surcouf and its commanders. The submarine's involvement in this episode tied it even more tightly to the complicated politics of Allied cooperation, suspicion, and competing agendas. In early 1942, the Surcouf was ordered to sail to the Pacific to reinforce French territories threatened by Japanese expansion. Before leaving, the submarine arrived in Bermuda for resupply, but its condition was grim. One of its propeller shafts was barely functional. The variable pitch mechanism that controlled the propellers was failing. Its diving systems were unreliable, and its engines struggled to produce sufficient power. Observers noted the submarine rode low in the water and lacked the agility needed for wartime operations. Still, on February 12, 1942, the Surcouf departed Bermuda for the Panama Canal, unescorted, slow, and vulnerable. It was the last time anyone confirmed seeing the vessel. What happened next remains one of the greatest naval mysteries of World War II. The official explanation, long accepted in American and French reports, suggested that the Surcouf collided with the American freighter SS Thompson Lykes on the night of February 18th. The freighter, running dark to avoid U-boats, allegedly rammed a submarine at 22:30 near the entrance to the Panama Canal Zone. Crew members claimed they heard scraping along the hull and cries in the water. Fearing a German submarine trap, they did not stop to investigate. Yet, when investigators reconstructed the Surcouf's likely position based on its known speed and mechanical limitations, the collision site appeared too distant to be plausible. Given the submarine's average speed of around 8 knots, it could not have reached the reported location in time. The damage to the freighter was also inconsistent with a collision involving a massive steel submarine nearly 4,000 tons in weight. The theory gradually weakened as historians re-examined wartime documents. A second theory, now considered more credible by many researchers, suggests the Surcouf was sunk not by accident but by tragic friendly fire. On the morning of February 19, 1942, American aircraft from the 6th Heavy Bomber Group reported attacking a large submarine near Panama. The plane crews described their target as unusually large and slow, riding low in the water, characteristics that matched the Surcouf precisely. They dropped bombs and claimed a hit, noting the vessel sank shortly afterward. No German submarines were reported lost in that region on that date. Given the confusion and inexperience of many American patrol units early in the war, it is entirely possible that they mistook the Surcouf for a hostile vessel and destroyed it. This explanation aligns more closely with the submarine's expected route and speed and fits a grim pattern of wartime misidentification. Yet, political considerations at the time may have discouraged public acknowledgement of such an error. It was far easier to attribute the loss to an unfortunate collision than to admit that an Allied plane had destroyed an Allied submarine. Theories beyond these two, suggesting that Surcouf was refueling U-boats or engaging in covert missions, have been thoroughly debunked. No evidence supports claims of wrongdoing by its crew, but the mystery persists in part because the wreck has never been found. Somewhere in the Caribbean, likely at a depth of more than 3,000 meters, lie the remains of the world's largest submarine cruiser and the more than 130 men who served aboard her. The ocean keeps its secrets well. The legacy of the Surcouf is a story of ambition, innovation, and tragedy. It represents a moment in naval history when nations explored radical ideas in search of strategic advantage. The submarine's creators imagined a vessel that could operate like a 19th-century corsair reborn in steel and diesel, capable of long-range raids and independent warfare. But the world changed faster than the Surcouf could adapt. By the early 1940s, air power and rapid response escort fleets had reshaped naval strategy. The Surcouf's slow diving time, poor stability, and mechanical fragility made it increasingly obsolete. Still, its crew served with dedication in a time of great political upheaval and mistrust, navigating not only the physical dangers of war but also the fraught relationships between allies with conflicting priorities. Today, memorials in Cherbourg and Greenock honor the submarine and its final crew. Surcouf stands as a symbol of the complicated nature of innovation, the way great ideas can falter when mismatched to the era in which they emerge, and how even the most advanced technology can succumb to human misunderstanding and the fog of war. It remains a compelling mystery, a story of a machine that tried to be too many things at once, and of the men who served aboard a vessel that was both marvel and misstep. The enigma of the Surcouf continues to fascinate historians, engineers, and naval enthusiasts alike, an enduring tale of the world's greatest underwater cruiser and its disappearance into the deep.